The night started like any other in Dusty Creek, a town that wore its loneliness like a badge. The saloon smelt of whiskey, smoke, and pride, the kind of pride that made men do foolish things just to prove they still mattered in a world that was changing too fast. Among the crowd sat Jeb Thornton, the wealthiest rancher this side of the Pecos, a man who owned more cattle than conscience, or so folks said. He was handsome in that careless way rich men sometimes are, with a reputation carved from dust and whiskey. That night, a group of his ranch hands and neighboring ranchers were deep in drink, their laughter loud enough to drown the piano man's tune. And then it happened, a cruel bet born of arrogance. "You see that widow over there," sneered Hank Laramie, one of Jeb's old rivals, pointing toward the far corner of the saloon. "She sittin' alone again, just like always. Says she lost her man in the mines last winter. I bet even your silver tongue couldn't make her smile, Jeb. Hey, I bet you wouldn't even get her to look your way." Jeb turned his gaze toward the corner. There she was, the widow everyone whispered about. Dressed in plain gray, a little too big for her frame, and a bonnet pulled low enough to shadow her face. She was thin, almost frail, yet something about her posture, straight, quiet, proud, stirred an unfamiliar hesitation in him. But pride doesn't stop for compassion. Jeb smirked, his voice cold as a coin hitting the table. "How much says I not only get her to look my way but share a night with me?" Hank laughed harshly, slapping his knee. $50, Thornton. You bring proof, and I'll pay you in gold." The saloon went quiet. Ice turned. The air thickened with the kind of silence that loves to watch men destroy themselves. And Jeb, too proud to back down, tipped his hat and rose. He crossed the room, boots echoing across warped floorboards. The widow didn't move. Didn't even flinch when he sat across from her. "Even in, Mom," he said with his best smile, the kind that usually melted hearts like butter. But her eyes, soft gray and distant, didst rise. "Even in," she murmured, voice small but steady. "I didst order company." He chuckled, leaning forward. "Maybe I didst come for orders. Maybe I just came to offer some." She looked up then, and for the first time, Jeb saw the quiet weight in her face. Not sadness exactly, something deeper, like she'd carried too much sorrow for too long. "You one of them ranchers?" she asked. "The kind that think money buys a moment of warmth?" Her tone wasn't bitter, it was weary, tired of the game. "Depends," he said softly. "Sometimes warmth's free. Sometimes it costs more than a man can pay." She studied him then, long enough that he felt his charm slipping like a cheap coat. Then she looked away. "Men don't come talk to widows unless they want something," she whispered. "But I reckon you already know that." Her words hit deeper than expected. For a moment, the bet didn't matter. But the watching ice in the saloon burned holes in his back, and pride forced him on. "Maybe I just want to make sure you ain't lonely," he said. "Seems a shame, a woman like you sittin' here all alone." Her lips curved in something almost like a smile, though not quite. "You think loneliness is cured with company, Mr. Thornton," she said quietly. "Some kinds of loneliness don't fade with talk." She stood then, gathering her small purse. "If you re lookin' for a story to tell your friends, I'd rather you make it up. I'm not for sale." She turned to leave, but something in him, guilt, pride, or maybe curiosity, made him follow. He caught up outside under the oil lamps, her steps crunching softly on the dirt. "Mom, wait," he said, suddenly unsure why. "I didst mean offense." She turned, the lamplight catching the side of her face, revealing faint scars near her hairline. "You meant to win," she said softly. "That's what men like you donna stock win, no matter the cost." He had no answer. She looked at him a long moment, and then, with a sigh that sounded like surrender, she said, "Fine. If you want to feel like you've won something, come by the old boarding house after the auction tomorrow. Room 3. You can pay your $50 there." Then she walked away, leaving him hollow. The next day, the cattle auction was buzzing with heat and dust. Jeb spent the morning pretending to care about livestock prices while his mind wandered back to that widow's gray ice. When evening came, he found himself walking toward the boarding house against every sensible thought he'd ever had. He knocked once. The door opened slowly, and she stood there, wrapped in a shawl, her face unreadable. She let him in. The room was small, poor, and spotless. A single candle flickered beside a worn Bible and a framed photograph of a man and 2 children, her husband, he guessed. "You came," she said simply. "Guess I did," he answered. "You sure you want this?" she asked. "I don't want to be a bet." He hesitated, then whispered, "Neither do I." What happened next was less lust than loneliness colliding, 2 broken people trying to remember what it felt like to be wanted, even for a night. When morning came, the light through the thin curtains found him awake, staring at her sleeping form. She looked peaceful, younger somehow. He reached to brush a strand of hair from her cheek and froze. The hair shifted slightly, not like real hair but like something placed there. His chest tightened. Slowly, she stirred, seeing his expression. For a long moment, she said nothing, just reached up and removed the wig gently, revealing a scalp scarred, thin, and bare. "I told you," she whispered, voice trembling. "I'm not for your stories, Mr. Thornton." He sat frozen, shame flooding every inch of him. She continued, voice barely above a breath, "My husband died in the mine collapse. I ran back in to find him. The fire took my hair, took my beauty, took everything but breath. Folks whisper, widowvich, now. No one looks at me without flinching. Until you." He couldn't speak. The weight of his foolish pride crushed him. "You thought I was a bet," she said quietly, tears pooling. "But you can't bet on someone who's already lost." She turned away, wrapping the shawl around her head. "Please go." But he didst. He reached out, taking her hand, rough, small, trembling. "No," he said hoarsely. "I came here as a fool. But I'm leaving a man who's ashamed of what he's become." She blinked in confusion. He stood, took out his wallet, and dropped the $50 coin bag on the table. "That's not for the bet," he said. "That's for the debt I owe your dignity." Then he left, heart pounding, the air burning with the sound of his own guilt. But the story didn't end there. Over the next few days, something shifted in Jeb. The ranch didn't feel the same. The laughter of his men now sounded hollow, and the money he'd once worshipped seemed filthy. One morning, he saddled his horse and rode to town, stopping outside the small schoolhouse on the edge of Dusty Creek. Through the window, he saw the widow, hair hidden beneath her bonnet, teaching a handful of children, including 2 little girls who looked like the ones in the photograph. He waited till class ended, then knocked softly. She looked startled but didst turn him away. "I didst expect to see you again," she said quietly. "Neither did I," he replied. "But I came to make something right." He explained that he'd spoken with the town council, that he'd offered to fund the rebuilding of the school, to buy new books, to make sure every child in town could learn for free. "And I told them it was in honor of your husband," he added, voice trembling. "And his widow." She stared at him, tears shining but unshed. "Why?" she whispered. "Because you showed me what real loss looks like," he said softly. "And what strength looks like too." The weeks that followed changed the town in quiet ways. The children came to school with shoes on their feet. The widow began to smile again, though shyly. And Jeb, he began spending more time there, fixing fences, hauling wood, finding excuses just to hear her speak. Gossip ran wild, of course, but he didn't care. One day, she found him hammering a new sign outside the schoolyard fence. It read, "Thornton Learning House, in memory of Samuel and Mary Holt." She stopped, tears spilling freely this time. "You learned my name," she said. "Never forgot it," he replied gently. "Didst want to?" That evening, as the sun bled gold across the prairie, they sat on the steps watching the children run home. "You never told me why you wore the wig," he said quietly. She smiled faintly. "Because folks need to see what they expect, not what's real," she said. "Sometimes people only offer kindness to faces they find easy to look at." He turned to her then, voice thick. "You don't need to hide from me anymore." Slowly, she reached up and removed the wig again. This time, he didn't freeze. He simply took her face in his hands, kissed her forehead, and whispered, "You're the bravest woman I've ever met. Years later, folks still talked about the widow and the rich rancher who changed Dusty Creek. They said she taught him that the worth of a man isn't measured in acres or gold, but in the grace he shows to the broken. And they said he taught her that love isn't about beauty, it's about seeing someone's soul and choosing them anyway. When they finally married, it wasn't in the saloon or at the ranch but beneath the big oak near the school, with children laughing all around. As he slipped the ring on her finger, she looked up at him, tears glimmering. "You really did win that bet," she whispered. He smiled softly. "No, Mary," he said, kissing her hand. "I finally lost, and that's how I found everything I ever needed." And as the wind rolled across the prairie, carrying laughter and love where once there had only been dust and pride, the town of Dusty Creek learned that sometimes the cruelest bets lead to the kindest hearts, and that even the richest man is poor until he learns the price of compassion.